for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me Trevor Dearing. So, Trevor, if you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. As I said, my name is Trevor Dearing. I look after our critical infrastructure solutions at Illumio. So that means basically that I work very closely with energy organizations, healthcare, anything that falls within that critical infrastructure bucket, which means generally anything that is regulated. So just as a background of how I got here, I've worked in basically telecoms for about 43 years and cybersecurity for 37 years. So I installed some of the first firewalls, some of the first, antivirus, and I've really sort of worked in that industry for a number of organizations over the years, including people like Juniper and Palo Alto Networks and folks like that. So I joined Illumio about 5 years ago because what they were doing looked interesting. So and that sort of leads me here now.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't think I installed some of the first firewalls, but not long after that. Yeah, early firewalls.
Yep.
So, recently, Illumio put out this Global Cost of Ransomware study. So I want to talk about that. And I guess to kind of start the conversation, I just want to kind of get your thoughts on, was there anything in it that stands out to you? Anything, anything that you thought, anything that surprised you?
Yeah, there were many things. I think it was, I guess the top headline was really the one that said that 58% of organizations that were surveyed had to halt operations due to a ransomware attack. And that was up quite substantially from previous years, because this isn't the first of these reports. This is basically the second one. They did Ponemon, who actually did the work for this, produced one in 2021, and that number had actually gone up, and that was quite surprising, balanced with the fact that in other questions organizations appeared a lot more confident in their ability to stop ransomware and the ability of their partners in the supply chain to stop ransomware. So there was a little bit of a dichotomy in those two pieces. But there were a lot of other sort of features in there that were sort of surprising and shocking in the same way.
Well, first I would say that bit you just talked about seems to be universal amongst cybersecurity surveys and studies. Like, no matter what the topic is, whether it's ransomware, identity, vulnerability management, whatever, almost every study I think every study I can think of, there is that same disconnect of understanding, like, yes, we think the problem is here, but we're also pretty sure we're prepared to defend against it. And it's like, okay, but the reality doesn't show that. Like, the whole rest of the survey shows that you're not prepared.
Yeah, I think one of my favorites is I think it's the Mike Tyson thing, is all the plans go out the window when you get punched in the face. And I think that is, that's what we're seeing here. And the organizations, and there was some, and just so many stats that were quite sort of scary. Just the fact that the way that a lot of these attacks propagate, the way they start, there's so many things in there that are very, very basic that could be solved quite easily, that have led to organizations being potentially more vulnerable than they thought. And I think that's something that the organizations potentially could address.
Okay. Well, one thing you may or may not know, but once upon a time, not too long ago, I worked at Cybereason, so I actually wrote the cost of ransomware report in 21 and 22.
Okay.
For Cybereason. I mean, I didn't do the research; our research team did it, but we had a lot. There were a lot of interesting findings then too. I mean, we found. I'm not going to remember the exact stats, but we basically found, that paying the ransom was a fool's game, because the organizations who paid the ransom, were like, I think it was like 60, like almost 2/3, got hit again within a month or two, often by the exact same threat actor, because they were like, well, you already demonstrated that you're willing to pay, and you haven't had time to fix the problem that we got in the first time. So here, give us some more money. So that was one, that stood out. And the other was that when even if that didn't happen, that like more than half of the companies that paid weren't actually able to recover their data. That, and when it comes to the double, triple extortion versions of ransomware, it's like you're paying this ransom to say, listen, I don't want you to sell my data. I don't want you to leak my data. So please don't do that. Here's the extortion money. The thing is, you have no idea whether they have hung on to that data. Yeah. Like there's no verification that it was deleted. So you don't know if they took your ransom and then turned around and sold your data anyway.
No, absolutely. I think, it's also interesting that in there was the fact that organizations saying, we're safe because we've got everything backed up. So there's not only the fact of you could pay the ransom and they never touch you again, but is the data you're going to recover actually all there? And to your other point, you could almost guarantee that they're not going to delete the data that they've got in case it becomes useful at some other point in the future. So,
yeah,
that's
so way back, so 1999, 2000, I worked for a .com in the Detroit area, and I was the network admin, and in 2000. It was different. We had with actual server racks and storage racks, and storage was not as cheap as it is now. And so I went to the CEO at some point and was like, hey, we're running out of space. We need to make a decision about what data to get rid of. Like, what's our threshold? How long do we want to retain data? And his response to me was, we're not getting rid of any data. And I was like, well, we don't have space. He's like, then buy more space. And I was like, okay, but we don't need this. Like, what are we going to do with it? He said, I don't know. But 7 months from now, when I come up with a way to use it, I still need to have it. He's like, if you delete it, I can't use it anymore. But, he's like, I don't know if I'm going to use it. I don't know when I'm going to use it, but I'm at least going to retain the option to use it. And I think that's, very similar to what you're saying. Like, if I'm a ransomware threat actor, it's like, maybe I don't have any intent of using it. Maybe I don't have any intent of leaking it, but who knows? Maybe a year from now, I'll come up with a reason.
Yeah. And I think that's, to a certain extent, we can now sort of see that those decisions were taken based on maybe someday someone will invent big data and AI, and right. we can mine that information. And a lot of my friends in the storage industry did very well out of that whole thinking. And it was actually quite a challenge because a lot of companies was taking that money and spending it on storage rather than on security. And, and we may be suffering the knock-on effect of that now. But I think what's actually sort of quite interesting when you look at that, again, there is that potential view that data is absolutely safe. But the reality is that when someone gets into your organization, it's not just that they steal the data they want, it's that they pretty much steal all the data, regardless of whether they think it's useful at the time or not. So trying to recover a lot of that old data becomes really, really difficult. And that can have a knock-on effect. But I think it's not just the data theft. What we're seeing increasingly is this move to disruption. And there was a big sort of survey, the World Economic Forum global survey that I have every year, and that last year there was a big shift because organisations are more concerned about disruption and the impact of that than necessarily the loss of pure data, because a lot of companies are thinking, okay, companies have lost data and not gone out of business. But if I'm an electricity organization, a generator or something, and I can't supply electricity, I'm out. I'm now out of business. So I think there is a shift, not only in the tactics of the bad guys, but also in the attitude of the the organizations themselves.
Well, so okay. On that note, I'd be curious to see, because I haven't followed it that closely since, in the last couple of years since I haven't been with Cybereason. But at the time, okay, so you had ransomware, and then it was, I'm going to steal your data, and so it became the double extortion, triple extortion versions of ransomware, and on the tail end of that, so probably like end of 22, I think. There was an attack, and I don't remember which group it was, but there was an attack where it was a ransomware attack, except for they never encrypted anything. They only took the data. And I noted that at the time because I thought, this is a better way to do this. If I'm the threat actor, I thought, and this gets to what you were talking about the difference in the industries, because I agree. Like if you're going at an electric company, or you're going at a hospital. Well, no, hospital's a bad one. Like they do care about the data as well. But if you're going after an electric company, maybe they don't care that much about the data. But if you're disrupting their ability to provide service, that's a big deal. So in that case, you probably do want to take their business offline if you want the ransom. But for a lot of other companies, I thought, and this actually goes to one of the stats in the study talked about, said 72% of organizations don't report ransomware attacks. And so thinking of this in the context of, Colonial Pipeline, you have a ransomware attack, it takes, the flow of oil down, and that becomes definitely national news, global news. It gets the attention of people you don't want the attention of, and there were repercussions, for that ransomware group from that attack. But if you don't disrupt operations, if you don't take oil production offline, if you had only taken Colonial Pipeline's data and extorted them, then you provide the victim with the ability to pay the ransom under the radar. If I disrupt power, everyone knows that company got hit by a ransomware attack, and there's no, you don't need to report it. It's just going to be news anyway, because there's no denying it. But if I only take your data and extort you, now you can pay the ransom, and nobody needs to know. It can be between you and your board and the CFO.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things in there, because there is, I guess, traditional ransomware and ransomware gangs who are doing the normal thing. But then we're starting to see sort of hacktivists. There's organizations who feel they can actually make more money, because I think I read a report that basically said the value of personal records has gone down, and that there's a lot more money to be made if you can say, we're going to stop your operation unless you give us a huge amount of money. There's substantial that. And there was an attack on the post office in the UK, where they couldn't ship parcels to Europe for about a week. And there was and they published, the whole negotiations between the National Cybercrime Centre and the attackers, and how the money was having to be done, and the volume of money and things like that. And so, the impact of those things is actually much more substantial than losing some data. And I remember having a conversation with a bank where they basically said, we could lose 50% of our data, and that would be embarrassing. If our online banking goes down, we're in real trouble. So I think it's the risk that organizations face,
right,
is the key. And the knock-on consequences of Colonial Pipeline have been fairly substantial over the years.
Well, and when I was at Cybereason, we were writing those reports, and then our guidance was the same as the guidance from the FBI and everything, which was you shouldn't pay the ransom. However, there was always this caveat of unless there's going to be lives at stake. If you're a hospital, maybe you pay the ransom because you just need to be up and running. But in the back of my mind, there was also always like in a pure ideological, position to say you shouldn't pay the ransom. Okay, that makes sense, but there is always a calculus. And I think back to when I was doing cybersecurity for in manufacturing. I was working with an automobile manufacturer, and they looked at downtime. Downtime is millions of dollars an hour.
Yep.
And so that would be part of the calculus. You might say, well, you shouldn't pay the ransom, and they're like, all right, but every hour we don't pay the ransom is costing us more than the ransom.
But I think that's one of the key things there is, and we're seeing this across the industry, and it's something the analysts are talking about, is almost a shift in thinking that if you think for 37 years since we installed the first firewalls, we've been trying to reduce the probability of a successful attack, and we've done that by we've done that 99.5% or whatever it is. But the reality of that is that if you get 200 attacks a day, one of them will be successful, and trying to reduce that more and more is just like almost fits the law of diminishing returns. More and more money to reduce it by smaller and smaller amounts. So I think there is now a view that we have to sort of start to think slightly differently, and instead of saying every time we come under attack it's a bad thing, is let's think about how we mitigate the impact of the attack once it started. So if you just, again, going back to the numbers in the report, they're very simple things around the reasons that attacks were successful or moved laterally through the organization, with things like missing patches, RDP ports being open, vulnerabilities, weak passwords, all the very, very basic things. And if we can reduce the ability of an attack to move through the organization by or how we manage the attack once it's happened. So if we can contain the attack, and if we can implement a good incident response program, if we can make sure that we're mitigating against missing patches and close the RDP ports and reduce the access to vulnerabilities and make the passwords better, then we've actually got a better chance of surviving those attacks than if we're spending money on some other things. So I think organizations need to really focus on that stat that says we had to shut down for a period, because that leads to other stats like we had to eliminate jobs, we lost significant revenue, some of those other things that were in the report that sort of lean on the fact that if we can do this, the basics better, we can actually have a better chance of surviving and maintaining our services even if we are under attack.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things in the study as well, and kind of semi-related, was that the report said only 44% of organizations. Well, it said 40% of organizations struggle to quickly detect and contain ransomware, which is a big part of that, obviously. And going back to what I was saying about when you pay the ransom, you don't get the data back. That also is in this report, because the stat was 51% of organizations pay the ransom, but only 13% recover all of their data. So again, paying the ransom doesn't really get you what you wanted. And the net result of the whole thing is, and I used this quote when I was doing stuff at Cyber Reason, is it's like in the movie War Games when the Whopper computer at the end runs through all the various permutations of a nuclear war, and it says, well, the only successful strategy is not to play the game. And that's the same thing here. It's like once you're hit by ransomware, there really isn't a good answer. Like, you can pay the ransom, you can not pay the ransom, you can try to restore from data backups. I mean, there are maybe better or less painful answers than others, but there's no good answer. And so the best answer is don't get hit by ransomware. Like, and so it really does come down to that, detection and containment, and because once it's there, you're out of good options.
Yeah, I think it comes down to equally, have a good plan of what's going to happen when you are attacked, because I mean we're past the if stage. We're now in the world of when, and so you're exactly right. It's how do we identify the minimum level of service that we can deliver and still stay in business. So what they call in the energy company sort of minimum viable operations. So what's the things that keep the lights on? How do we, and how do we protect those and ring fence them in the event of an attack? Then once we get to that point, is again, detection is absolutely key. But equally, once we have detected it, how do we contain it? And I think, they're the sorts of things. It is, if you think about the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's been a huge sort of focus over the years on sort of identify and protect, a bit on detect, not enough on response. And I think, again, that's a thing that has to change within the industry, is that ability to respond and get back to operations as quickly as possible.
Okay. So one of the other things that kind of stood out to me looking over the study was cloud environments. Cloud data seem to be the most vulnerable.
Yep.
And a lot of organizations, especially medium and larger organizations, are hybrid multi-cloud. I mean, they aren't either on-premise, or they're only in Google, or they're only in AWS. Like they have all of the above, or some collection of them. And so, it seems like maintaining visibility across a hybrid environment is a challenge for a lot of organizations. So like, how can organizations deal with that better? And which I guess has kind of multiple benefits. I mean, yes, it would help you in terms of your ability to detect and contain ransomware. It would also just help you in general. Like, having visibility is kind of step one for everything else.
Yeah, I think when the I guess the sort of the challenge, as you said, is the hybrid environment, because a lot of organizations are sort of viewing the cloud as a separate, there's clouds over there, everything else over there. And the challenge is that how do you maintain security if you're migrating your functions, your workloads from on-prem to the cloud? If you're even changing from server-based to serverless, how do you see all that information, and how do you visualize it? And I think one of the challenges that we face everywhere is that a lot of the time we're pulling huge amounts of data out of systems and then trying to analyze it. So there's huge data lakes that we have, and we use big data analytics to sort of try and find out what's going on. And it's sort of very heavy, very costly, and sort of prohibitive to a lot of organizations unless you're a major bank. So we have to sort of then look at how can we sort of understand the risks in a much more simple way. And so again, that comes down to understanding what is communicating with what. So where are things communicating that shouldn't be? What are the vulnerabilities out there? What are the potential unknown external communications? So there's lots of things out there that potentially have external facing connections that shouldn't be there. So so fundamentally being able to visualize that and take action becomes absolutely key, because if you can turn off all of the unauthorized connectivity, then you're going a long way to stopping ransomware. And to a certain extent, that and we use the word zero trust, and everyone uses it very flippantly, and it's everywhere, but it literally is only allow the connections to be good. and in that way we can simply mitigate the impact of a ransomware attack, and being able to do that in both across that hybrid cloud on-prem environment is absolutely key.
Okay. I say this pretty much every podcast now, but I think we're legally obligated to talk about AI and the impact of AI. It's a requirement now. But it is, obviously, very relevant to basically everything across cybersecurity, because I mean, initially it was just now attackers can use ChatGPT to make more convincing communications, whether phishing or spear phishing, and it's like, okay, well, that's very true.
Yeah.
Although I would say, if they had, it wouldn't have been that hard, even 5 years ago, for a threat actor to just go on the dark web and find an English-speaking threat actor to help them out. Like, it would be a very small investment to say, hey, can you just read this and see if this makes sense in English?
Yeah.
But now that we have generative AI, that part's simple. But what we don't talk about as much, and is probably at least as big, if not bigger, concern, are all the ways that, like, everything that we can do with generative AI as a benefit is also a benefit for the bad guys, in terms of being able to, aggregate and correlate data from multiple sources, and then quickly analyze it and distill information that's relevant, and then and then devise the attack. So, like, all of those things can now be accelerated and streamlined with AI. So when it comes to AI generated ransomware, what are we supposed to do with that?
Well, I think, as you're right, there's sort of two aspects to AI, and everyone talks about deep fakes and getting phishing emails better and things like that. And you're right that they're going to get better and better. But I think the thing that a lot of people miss is the ability to use AI to evade existing security. So there's been a lot of effort in trying to evade EDR, and there's been a lot of research on the dark web about that for a while. But the ability of AI to then effectively create an exploit that may fail, but then learn from that to create another exploit that is then successful, I think is a big challenge. And we've seen these regenerative morphing attacks starting to happen. But the thing that we then have to do is reduce going back to the MITRE attack model, we have to reduce the ability of the bad guys to be able to learn what is going on within the organization and where some of these vulnerabilities are, because it will find them so quickly. So that's where we have to do things like control movements. So again, micro segmentation of your environment will stop AI learning where a lot of the vulnerabilities potentially can be. And so, AI as an attack tool will become very, very powerful. And we could get into an AI arms race around that. But again, it comes back to do the basics better, reduce the ability of AI to find where all these vulnerabilities are by doing your patches, closing RDP ports, fixing vulnerabilities, improve passwords. So, I think that has to be that piece to, just stop not only ransomware, but the ability of AI to learn what is going on in the organization by restricting its movement.
Okay, fair. Well, and to your point, I mean, I feel like that AI arms race already exists. So the thing about the AI as it stands now, is on both the good guy side and the bad guy side, it's being able to take things that are more or less routine and working them through faster and at scale. So whether I'm using AI as a level one SOC analyst to say, hey, I just need you to monitor all of this and let me know what seems concerning, and then we'll take these actions. Like, those are all things we could already do with humans. It's just that the AI can do it faster and at scale. And what you were just describing is like, those are all things that the ransomware actors and threat actors in general can already do. Like, they already they do their reconnaissance, and they get a foothold, and they move laterally, and like all those things that they do. It's just that it took more time previously. So they might try an exploit and it didn't work, and they go, okay, well, now what can I do? Well, the AI can now do that in seconds. What might have taken hours, or at least many minutes. Now the AI is like doing it faster, and so it does become well, I need a good guy AI to fight your bad guy AI, because I can't possibly respond quick enough.
But I think, no, you're absolutely right. There's sort of two aspects to it. There's the using AI to spot things happening. So you're right, the sort of the level one analyst type stuff. But then there's also, I think, one of the real positive things with AI is just making a lot of other functions within cybersecurity much simpler. So, every cybersecurity tool contains information in some way. So if you can sort of assimilate that and get to the point where you can say, well, actually, I can. We were talking about all the things like missing patches and RDP and vulnerability. So if I can bubble that up and say, here's all the things you have to go and fix, and how to go and fix them, then that's a big step forward, and that doesn't need a too sophisticated, too powerful AI tool to be able to do that. So I think there's sort of two sides to how we use AI to sort of benefit that ability to make our organizations more resilient.
Yeah, well, and this goes back probably 10, 20 years, like the idea of saying, hey, look, here are the security best practices. These are things that you should do. And it's relatively well established in that sort of, Pareto principle, 80-20 rule kind of way. Like, if you just did these basic things, you would actually eliminate 80% of the risk. So like, all the other bells and whistles and shiny tools, they'll help you get that other 20%. But if you just did these, it's like the, eat right and exercise version of you can do all these other things and take the miracle pill and go to the gym, but if you just did these things, it would take care of most of the problem. And there have been tools to try to manage it. I mean, there are organizations have tools to monitor policy enforcement and such. And I think that's again another area where it's like, we know that's a good thing to do. We have tools that have tried to do it not very well. And part of it is that it's so, the attack surface, the environment I'm trying to protect is both massive and ever changing. People do, go sign up for a SaaS app you didn't know existed or whatever, and all of a sudden you've got, other holes. And so trying to keep up with that is obviously a very big problem. And so that's another place where it's like, I'm not saying we hand the keys over to AI to control everything, but it is something where, like, if you had an AI in your environment where you said, look, here's the policies, just keep an eye on everything and let me know if these policies are being violated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look back 80 years, and the sort of the very basic sort of cyber intelligence from the Second World War was really just to analyze the communications between various points to work out who was where and what was going on and things like this. And you're looking for, again, behavioral anomalies. So it's the start of that whole behavioral anomaly detection. And it's fascinating if you sort of visit Bletchley Park in the UK, where all the sort of Turing stuff went on. It's really interesting to see that was being done then. So to a certain extent, there's some very basic tools that you can use now that sort of use that type of information, but of probably using it better than we did 10 years ago. So for instance, the fact that you, out of cloud network security groups, out of the Windows and Linux operating systems, you can pull the metadata out of there that shows who's talking to who, and you can use that with AI at the front to sort of identify where things are happening that potentially shouldn't be, that expose all of those basic things. So I think that the tools are there, and the tools are probably getting better on a year by year basis to be able to just bubble up where those very simple things that we can fix actually exist. So I don't, that's not super expensive AI. That's relatively low level AI that goes on there. So I think that's one of the big differences, and one of the things that we'll see a lot more over the next 12 months.
Okay. Pulling this back to the report, one of the things I saw mentioned in there is just I'll say user error, but insider negligence, user error, those types of things. And I think when it comes to the phishing side of things, like to me, I don't have the numbers to validate this, so I don't know that this is true, but I feel like phishing is the gateway for most other cyber attacks, ransomware being one of them. And there's lots of organizations that do phishing, anti-phishing training. I'm gonna send you fake phishing messages and see if you can detect them. I personally don't think that moves the needle. I mean, I've been in organizations that do that. I generally do detect it, but it's like, yeah, but I detect it because I was going to detect it anyway, like that. And someone who doesn't, and no matter how many of those you send out, doesn't change that the next phishing attack might be slightly more convincing, or catch someone when they're like distracted with something else. And so it just becomes a numbers game, and those things are going to get through most likely. Bottom line, what insight or guidance do you have for what if I'm running an organization, is there anything I can do to try to help prevent my users from being the cause of my ransomware attack?
I sort of agree that you can train people to spot things, but these things are getting so good that I mean, we as cybersecurity professionals potentially will see things that other folks won't. But if you're classed as a normal person, then the chances that you'll spot everything is almost zero. So yes, there's a lot of tools, a lot of email security. Email security market has sort of really taken off, and there are now tools that spend their time trying to spot deep fakes and all these sort of things. So again, I don't think we should put as the whole focus on the end user, because they're going to get through. I mean, we've all had. I had a text the other day saying, "Hey, Mum, I've changed my phone number," which was bad on so many levels because both my kids were actually in the room at the time. So, and obviously calling me Mum. But the reality is that we have to sort of in our head, and I say this to sort of elderly relatives, is don't trust anything that you see. Almost like if you get a communication from a bank, don't trust it. So I think there is an amount of education, and there is a culture that says be suspicious of everything. But the reality is, again, we have to say, okay, at some point, if you've got 10,000 employees, one of them's going to fall for something that's really good, and ransomware is going to get into our organization. So we have to contain it. And we can either spend millions and millions and millions more on trying to detect it, or we can spend a lot less on containing it. And I think that
Right.
has to be the way forward.
I would agree, because my take on it is always like, I don't think you shouldn't do security, training, like user awareness training. Like, fine, help
Yep.
users understand the security, what security is and how to be more secure and how to, identify a phishing email, etc. That's great. That just can't be that's like separate from your security plan, though. Like, ultimately, when an attack hits, you can't point your finger at the user. Like, your job as a security professional is to defend in spite of the user. And it's just like I used to, I've railed against the notion of every organization when they get hit saying it was a nation state attack. And like, yes, I get it. If it was Russia or it was China, they have more resources than, the threat actor down the street. But that doesn't change your job. Like, your job is still to defend the network. Like, you don't get to just shrug your shoulders and go, well, it was China, so what are you going to do? So yes, I think that, security training for users is great, but it's not your defense.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, you're right. Everyone does say, oh, it was nation state. I mean, the reality, if they're asking for money, it's probably not a nation state. So, it's going to be someone doing it commercially. But you can't. It's another one of those things. It's a bit like you can't outsource risk. The risk is always yours. You can't shift the risk to the cloud provider. You can't shift the risk to the end user. The buck stops with you. And so you have to take a balance of, am I going to try everything to stop some end user clicking on an email they shouldn't, or do I plan for when they do? And I think that has to be quite a big shift in culture, across many organizations.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I think I basically hit on everything I wanted to talk about in the report itself. I guess I would kind of wrap with asking you either, kind of a two-part question. One is, anything else that stood out from the report that I haven't asked you about that you want to talk about? And then the other is just kind of more prognostication, like, based on all of this, based on your experience, like, what do you think, how do you see this playing out over the next couple of years, with AI generated threats, with, the, evolving, security measures, and like you've pointed out, microsegmentation is a big part of it. Like, we talk, like you said, we talk about 0-day, in a way that it kind of becomes meaningless, because if you just keep saying 0-day, it's like, well, what do you mean by 0-day? Is that the same thing as what I mean? But it does come down to, being able to basically limit the blast radius. It's like, something's going to happen, something's going to get through, there is going to be an exploit, but how do I detect it quickly, and how do I make sure it affects as little as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree, and I think this, the report sort of lends itself into that narrative quite well. And I think the other thing that is happening, that we're starting to see, is almost a shift in regulators around the world, moving from, here's a lot of things that you should be doing, and tell us, how you're doing it to solve these problems, to keep the bad guys out, to some of the newer regulations, like DORA in Europe for banking, like the suggested changes to HIPAA in the US, being a lot more prescriptive and being a lot more about resilience, about, maintaining that service. Because if you look at, we were talking about hospitals there, it's, absolutely still sort of the number one target of most ransomware gangs, because the perception is that if you take a hospital off the air, that's a real, people are going to die, so that you're going to get your money really, really quick. So, so there has to be a lot more focus on that whole thing. And I think that will become something that we'll see over, again, 2-3 years. I think there'll be a major shift in sort of an adoption of that I'm going to keep my crown jewels really safe. And then if I have to sacrifice something, it's a bit like, there was always this thing about don't be the slowest antelope. So, that's the one that gets eaten, but there's now a danger in being the second slowest antelope. So we have to sort of shift away from that towards let's find some way of keeping the lion in a cage rather than just trying to run faster. So I think that is going to be the thing that's going to change. And again, we see that every year at the World Economic Forum. You see a gradual shift in attitude in that direction. So I think for major organizations and small organizations, that has to be a shift. We have to move away from the, if we suffer an attack, the CISO is going to get fired, to how did we work together to protect the business while we're under attack? And I think, and reward when that's been successful.
Right. All right. Very good. Awesome. This is a good conversation. Thank you for taking the time to join me.
No, thank you, Tony. It was great.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.